It all started when I invited two of my university classmates, Luz and Marisa, to stay with me in my mother's house in Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua. At the time, my mom had purchased a home there, but I was living and attending school in the US. When my grandmother fell ill, I decided to move to Juarez to be closer to her, and my mom agreed to let me use the house. Luz and Marisa were extremely well-behaved, kind, and helpful around the house. The place was big enough that we each had our own bedrooms with private bathrooms, so we were quite comfortable. The first few weeks were perfect, but gradually I started to notice some very unsettling things happening. One of the first red flags was that the sisters soon decided to start sharing a single room, as if they were afraid to sleep alone. I didn't think too much of it at first, but a few days later, Luz and Marisa nervously told me they had almost woken me up the previous night. Apparently, they had seen shadowy figures surrounding the car in the closed garage. The strange thing was that the garage was enclosed by a tall gate, and I had a dog that usually made a ruckus if anyone even approached the property, but he had remained eerily silent. Hoping to help calm their nerves, I agreed to go with them to their Christian church, even though I was Catholic. But it wasn't long before I was the one who needed soothing. One night, I woke with a start in my bed, and it was vibrating. No, my whole body was moving in sync with the mattress. It was so bizarre, like something out of a horror movie. I just lay there silently until morning, not daring to make a sound. Those unsettling tremors continued for months. When my twin brothers, around 13 or 14 at the time, came to stay with me for the summer. One afternoon, my brother went back into the house to grab some forgotten socks from my bed. He came running back, visibly shaken, and told us that when he tried to grab the socks, the bed had moved on its own. I had never mentioned the nighttime shaking to them, so there was no way they could have been suggestible. I went to investigate, and sure enough, the bed had shifted at least half a meter. I tried to play it off and joke about it, but by nightfall, we'd almost forgotten the incident. That night, however, I heard the unmistakable sound of a faucet running in the kitchen. I got up to check, and one of the taps was on. I figured maybe one of my brothers had been thirsty, but I hadn't heard anyone pass through my room. I went back to bed, only to hear the faucet again shortly after. This time, when I listened closely, I realized that not just one, but all the taps and showers in the house had been turned on. I let out a scream like never before, and my brothers came rushing in. As soon as they arrived, everything went silent. I was tempted to go to my grandmother's nearby house, but it was too late, and my car wasn't working. So my brothers ended up falling asleep, while I stayed awake all night, listening to disturbing noises coming from the kitchen. It sounded like a gathering of several people, talking in hushed tones with the occasional quiet laugh, as if they were mocking me. There were no neighboring houses close by, just an empty lot on one side and a small business on the other, so I have no idea where those voices were originating. The nightly meetings in the kitchen continued all summer long. I even got used to hearing a bell, like the kind they have in old movies to signal mealtime or church, ringing periodically. It was as if there was some kind of organized ritual happening in my house. When the summer ended and my brothers left, Luz and Marisa returned. One night at dinner, they confessed that while they didn't really believe in those kinds of things according to their faith, they were absolutely terrified of being alone in the house. From then on, we made a pact that we would never be there by ourselves. We would always wait for each other in the yard before going inside together. Luz's birthday came around, and as I sat in the living room waiting for the girls to get ready to cut the cake, Marisa came to me looking confused. She asked how I had gotten from the bathroom back to the living room so quickly. I told her I hadn't been in the bathroom at all, just waiting here. Marisa said they had clearly heard my voice from the bathroom, asking them to come to the kitchen. When we checked the bathroom, there was still steam, as if someone had just showered. I didn't want to ruin the celebration, so I didn't say anything. The next day, as the sisters were going to send birthday photos to their parents, they noticed that several faces of people appeared in the background of the pictures. Women, men, all around Luz. We couldn't dismiss it as a camera glitch, since the images showed up on multiple phones. It wasn't long after that the girls moved out. I'm grateful they're gone, because I don't think I could have stayed there much longer either. To this day, I still have one of those mysterious photographs, though most were lost when I changed phones. I feel it's better that way. I can't help but wonder, though, what dark forces were at work in that house? My own chilling encounter with the paranormal took place around 3 years ago in a small town called San Juan de Escobedo, in the state of Jalisco, where my grandmother lives. I had gone there to stay with her for a while, needing to provide some company due to a health situation she was dealing with. On the day I arrived, I was given the room that had once belonged to my late grandfather during the final days of his life. Even though I knew this, the room had never filled me with any particular feelings of fear or unease. That first night, as I was preparing for bed, I noticed the only source of light in the room came from a series of twinkling colored lights surrounding 2 large religious images across from the bed. Within minutes of my head hitting the pillow, I had drifted off to sleep in this unfamiliar environment. Sometime in the dead of night, I suddenly woke with a start, my body and mind gripped by a powerful mix of terror and dread. I was experiencing sleep paralysis, something I had dealt with before, but not with this level of intensity. As I struggled in vain to move, I could make out the distinct silhouette of a tall, imposing figure wearing a large hat, standing ominously near the bed. The flickering lights behind this shadowy specter made it difficult to discern any definitive features. I tried desperately to call out in prayer, but I couldn't seem to recall a single complete prayer, no matter how hard I racked my brain. "Our Father, who art in heaven," I'd begin, only to immediately lose the rest of the words. Suddenly, a loud crashing sound erupted from the kitchen, which broke the paralysis. I sat up quickly, my eyes still clenched shut tight, fearful of seeing that haunting figure again. I rushed to my grandmother's room, deeply worried something might have happened to her, but found her sleeping peacefully. In the kitchen, everything was perfectly intact. I couldn't bring myself to go back to that room, and ended up waiting anxiously until morning. When my uncle came to visit the next day, he jokingly asked how I had slept. I recounted the strange occurrences, and he simply responded, with a creative ambiance he visited. Confused, I pressed him to elaborate, and that's when he revealed that his wife had previously been the one staying overnight to keep my grandmother company. And it was she who had experienced the whispers, knocks, and disembodied voices in that very bedroom. "Don't be afraid, my dear," he said. "It was likely just your grandfather, wanting to meet you since he couldn't see you as a newborn." His words did provide me some comfort, and I assumed it had indeed been my grandfather, just wanting to catch a glimpse of his new great-granddaughter before he passed. For the remainder of my stay, the only disturbances were occasional noises coming from the neighboring house, as if furniture was being moved around, and sometimes I'd hear faint voices conversing. But I never saw that shadowy, hat-wearing figure again. Recently, though, I've begun to reconsider my initial assumption. Reflecting back on the description of the silhouette I saw that night, it doesn't seem to match the image I have of my grandfather from photos. He was never one to wear a hat like that. I want to share with you a legend from the region where I live, as well as 2 related personal stories from my stepfather and grandfather. I'm from the state of Yucatán, Mexico, where there are many legends about animals, witches, and other supernatural beings. The particular legend I want to focus on today is about dogs that can talk. You've probably heard these kinds of stories before, the idea that dogs possess the ability to converse with humans. This legend has always made me a little uneasy, given that I have 3 pets of my own. The story goes something like this. There was once a woman in a Yucatecan village who had a newborn baby girl. The woman was a single mother, responsible for all the household chores, and she tended to be quite irritable. She would often scold her dog, telling him that instead of just lying around sleeping, he should be helping her with some of the work around the house. Despite her mother's warnings not to treat the dog that way, the woman would repeatedly berate him, saying things like, "Why don't you at least watch the baby while I go get water from the well?" One day the woman rushed off to the well, leaving the crying infant behind. When she returned about 10 minutes later, she heard a man's voice singing a lullaby. Slowly approaching her home, she peeked inside to find the dog standing on 2 legs, gently rocking the baby in a hammock as he sang. Horrified, the woman screamed and collapsed, suffering a fatal heart attack. Some versions of the tale say neighbors saw the dog run out on his hind legs, while others claim he was simply found napping under the hammock when people rushed to the house. Regardless, the moral is clear. It's unwise to mistreat or disrespect dogs, lest they reveal their true supernatural nature. Now, I know these kinds of stories can be viewed simply as folklore meant to scare people, but I have two personal accounts that make me believe there may be some truth to the idea of dogs possessing an ability to communicate. The first story is from my grandfather, who was a fisherman. My grandfather, rest his soul, used to tell us grandkids how he and the rest of the family had a bad habit of teasingly telling the dogs to talk whenever they were around. One early morning, before he went out fishing, my grandfather heard voices conversing on his porch. He recognized the two dogs, Canelo and another whose name I can't recall, who often roamed the streets but always returned to sleep at the house. My grandfather heard one dog say it was hungry, having not eaten all day, and the other advising it not to go in a certain direction because the people there were bad and would hurt it, suggesting it should stay put because the lady of the house would feed it well. Perplexed but not frightened, my grandfather slowly opened the door to investigate, only to find the two dogs staring back at him, as if waiting for a response. He swore he was not making up the story. The dogs had been carrying on a conversation. The second account is from my stepfather, who also used to be a fisherman. When we lived in a house with walls made of cardboard, you could hear everything happening outside, including people's voices passing by on the street. My stepfather would often be awakened in the early mornings by murmuring sounds outside. At first, he ignored them, but the muttering became a daily occurrence. One day, he listened more closely and realized the voices were coming from our own two dogs, Yak and Kerm, a mother and son pair. He said he could clearly make out the dogs discussing something, though he couldn't discern the exact words. But he was convinced they were carrying on an actual conversation, just as my grandfather had described. I know some of these stories may have been fabricated to scare people, but I can assure you that a great many people in my region firmly believe dogs have the ability to talk. Whether it's true or not, the legends and personal accounts certainly make me think twice before dismissing the possibility entirely. If anyone has any insights to share on this topic, I would be very interested to hear them.